Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our March Speaker Series session. My name is Andre Green, and I am the Network Coordinator for the Cancer and Environment Network of Southwestern Pennsylvania. We are a network of over 50 organizations, and we strive to raise awareness and emphasize the intersections between environmental health, relevant scientific literature, harmful toxins, and cancer. To learn more, you can find our website in the chat. Today's exciting presentation is on cultivating resilience, mindfulness as a part of a public health strategy for environment-induced health challenges. During the call today, if you happen to get disconnected at all, please just log back into the session. Additionally, if you have any technical issues at all, please private message me and I will be able to provide you with assistance. Throughout the call, we invite all participants to add your thoughts, feelings, reactions into the chat throughout the presentation. We also want to encourage a dialogue and not a monologue. So please feel free to add your questions in the chat at any time, and we can address those at the time. We also will answer any additional questions at the end of the call during the Q&A portion. And lastly, this presentation is being recorded and it will be sent to all registrants as well as added to our website. Now that we've set the intention for the call today, I am extremely excited to introduce our presenter today, the Executive Director of Awaken Pittsburgh, Stephanie Romero. Stephanie is an educator with 20 plus years of experience teaching elementary, middle school, high school, and college students. She has been a meditator and mindfulness practitioner for more than 15 years. In 2013, seeking to bring others the same benefits that she was experiencing, Stephanie was trained in the Path of Freedom mindfulness curriculum, which she delivered through the Hope pre-release program in the Allegheny County Jail. Stephanie's dissertation was the culmination of 3 years of research into mindfulness education. She is also a member of the University of Pittsburgh's Center for Mindfulness and Consciousness Studies. Without further ado, I would like to officially pass the baton off to you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Andre. Thank you to everyone for joining and for having me. I guess it's not quite morning. I was going to say this morning, this afternoon already. Although I think where Andre is, it's morning. So wherever you're at, morning, afternoon, or evening. Yeah, so I'll start just with a quick practice. So I get to always lead a mindfulness practice. I'm the mindfulness lady. So we get to start off always with a practice. And today we're going to be doing what is known as an anchoring practice. So whenever you practice mindfulness, you need to have something to rest your attention on, and that's your anchor. So the first ingredient is always, where am I putting my attention? The second ingredient is resting attention there. And then the third ingredient for practice is what happens when my mind wanders. So we're going to try to rest our minds on an anchor. And so for just a moment, I would like you to just notice your physical body and any sensations that you have right at this moment that might be positive or neutral. So for example, maybe you have the sensation of being seated in a chair or your feet on the floor. Maybe that feels positive. It could be also the air against your skin, your clothing touching your skin. That all might feel either positive or neutral. Or maybe it's the feeling of your baby piggy toe, which you don't really notice much. That also might be neutral. So taking a moment to just feel into your physical sensations and choosing an anchor. And hopefully everyone has found something to rest attention on. It could be the feeling of the body breathing as well. That's a pretty typical anchor for meditative practices, but it can be any physical sensation. So now we'll rest attention there. And then if our minds wander, as soon as we notice that, not a big deal, that's what brains do. We just gently bring it back to the anchor, whatever we've chosen. And we will do that for 2 minutes. I will time us. And at the end of those 2 minutes, I will ring a chime to bring us back together. I hope the chime came through for you. I didn't want to ring it too loud, but I'm never sure how that comes across the Zoom. Great, so thank you for trying that with me. I always love to just start with a practice so you can get a taste of what that actually is before diving into how mindfulness can be a support for us. Sorry, my slides are being a little slow with the transition. There we go. So as Andre said, I'm the executive director of Awaken Pittsburgh. We're a local 501c3 nonprofit. And as you can see there on the screen, our vision is an equitable and just society where diverse peoples live in harmony with each other and their environments. And we do this by providing mental health supports through mindfulness and meditation and other non-therapeutic modalities. I myself, as Andre mentioned, was an educator for many, many years in a K-12 school. I also taught at the University of Pittsburgh here locally. And what I really found, especially teaching K-12, is when I integrated mindfulness into what I did, it really shifted things for the positive and supported me, my mental health and well-being, but also supported greater achievement and connection with the students that I was working with. So at the time that I started the nonprofit, there was no one really working to systematically bring mindfulness into the region. There were people, of course, doing it kind of individually. And so my hope was really to create an organization that could serve the broader region to really help bring social and emotional regulation skills to people experiencing trauma or high amounts of acute stress. So that's our work. And also, as Andre mentioned, I have my chat open and Andre will be monitoring the chat. So any questions or comments that you have as we go along, please just drop those in the chat. So I wanted to start by just saying that I am making a few assumptions about health and about our world. So one of them is that there is no physical health without mental health, right? And this is actually a quote from Dr. Brock Christholm, who was the first director general of the World Health Organization. And so kind of expanding on this, if we have physical health problems, especially ongoing, that can lead to mental health issues and challenges. And if we have mental health problems, it can also lead to physical health problems. So we know that those are interconnected. Our mental self and our physical self are very interconnected. And so we need to kind of take care of both when we have illness, either mental or physical. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I ran across this study coincidentally published on March 14th by WESA, which is our local NPR station. And the headline is, Pitt study finds cancer patients do better when mental health care is part of treatment. And I'll just read a quote from that article. Navigating a serious health diagnosis like cancer is emotional. A new study from the University of Pittsburgh researchers finds that when mental health treatment is integrated into oncology care, patients are less likely to end up in the hospital. So for me, as I was prepping this presentation, I was like, this is exactly what I'm trying to talk about. So if you're interested in that article, you can Google it. Like I said, it came out on March 14th, so fairly recently. But it is exactly the topic that we're talking about today, and supporting that idea that mental health and physical health are interconnected. A couple of more assumptions that I'm making are that we are in the midst of an environmental crisis, and it will be population level disaster, right? So by that, I mean, it's not something that's only gonna affect a few individuals. It's gonna affect entire populations. We're already seeing that. Oh, Andre just popped the link in the chat. Thanks, Andre. But we're already seeing this. We have whole island nations that are losing their entire island from the rising sea level, right? We have whole communities that are being impacted. And we also know that poor BIPOC communities are most affected. Then the final assumption I just want to name is that if we leave these challenges unaddressed, that we will be having a global epidemic of individual, community, societal illness, distress, and trauma. Okay, just to kind of name where I'm coming from. And so can we take a public health approach since this is a population level situation that we're facing? And what does that actually mean? So this is a typical example of what a public health approach looks like. So you can see if the triangle represented the entire population, the bottom level, that green level, is policies and activities that would most likely prevent disease. So you can think at this level of things that are going to support health for everyone, like what everyone would need. So dental hygiene is an example of something. If everyone does it, it's going to prevent dental disease, right? And then the next level up is risk factors that lead to injury or disease are then being prevented. So safety belt laws and vaccinations are an example there, right? So just about everyone hopefully has the message that they should wear their seatbelt. And the reason is because that's going to prevent injury. So those bottom two, tier 1 and tier 2 is what they're called, interventions, are things that everyone can do to get a little bit of a boost to their mental health or physical health and well-being. In the case of environmental degradation, the bottom level there would be like legislation that's preventing or penalizing pollution, right? Air quality standards that everyone, or drinking water standards that everyone would benefit from. In terms of mindfulness, it's making accessible to everyone practices that can support their mental health and well-being. And then as we continue to go up, that secondary prevention, as you can see, it's kind of preclinical, so you need a little extra help there, but you're not actually needing to be admitted to the hospital, right? And the tertiary prevention or intervention at the top is something has happened, how do we support you now that it has happened, right? Okay, I hope that's the model. Hope that makes sense to everyone. But it's basically a tiered model. Bottom is for absolutely everyone. As our need increases, so does our level of intervention, with prevention being a key instrument. And so the idea here is that we could, by bringing in primary and secondary interventions to support mental health and well-being, build community and individual healing and resilience. And so what does that actually mean? And so here we have this little kind of pie chart that lists a whole variety of non-therapeutic, non-traditional in some ways more traditional actually, interventions that could be available to all kinds of folks. And some of that is spirituality. So we know when you look at the Wheel of Wellness, for example, spiritual practices really, really support people in difficult times. There are other things like somatic healing methodologies, healing circles, art therapies, traditional medicine, and then traditional mental health treatment down there as well. And then mindfulness-based healing. And then there's also at the top left, I missed nature-based and animal therapies. So these are all modalities that we can be thinking about that are available to build resilience, but also at that higher level, once something has happened, what's an intervention that can then support us? So some of these do double duties as something that's helping us once we have something occur that is taxing our mental or physical health, but also on the resilience side, if we're doing them ahead of time, build resilience so that the impact isn't as great. And I just want to call out Bob Dappelt, who is the coordinator of the International Transformational Resilience Coalition. And his organization, you have the website there, is one that really explores population level mental health supports and community-based mental health supports. And so you can see this quote from his org. Our goal is to build a global movement that inspires people to organize and run initiatives in their neighborhoods and communities that use a public health approach to strengthen and sustain everyone's capacity for mental wellness and resilience, especially focusing on the climate crisis. All right. So all of this is kind of in this body of area of mindfulness. So before I dive deeper in, I want to just say, what is that thing? What is mindfulness? And this is one of my favorite definitions, and it's paying attention to what's happening right now, including our mental events, with curiosity, openness, and acceptance. So mindfulness itself is this quality of attention, right? And that's actually a skill we can build. So often I get asked, what's the difference between mindfulness and meditation? Meditation is one thing you can do to build your mindfulness. It's a mindfulness practice, but it's just one among many ways we can practice mindfulness. So if you think about what we did at the very beginning with the anchoring practice, I asked you to rest your attention on a physical sensation. So that's what's happening right now, and that you could just see it. So that's the curiosity and openness. Acceptance there does not mean a moral judgment. It's just, yes, that's what's there, right? Which you could say is the opposite of denial. Sometimes things happen and we just want to push them away and pretend that they're not happening. So acceptance is just the recognition part. I'm sorry if you hear my grumbling dog behind me. There's some people walking around in my house out there, and he is not liking it. So the next question that you might have is, okay, so that's mindfulness, but why is this part of this public health approach? Why do we want to talk about it? Why is this important to think about? And so I want to just do a quick review of literature of findings that could support this. So when mindfulness is added to support a variety of physical conditions, research finds that it can reduce primary symptoms and conditions such as back pain and other pain-related ailments, for example, fibromyalgia. It also improves symptomology in people with diabetes and things like panic disorder. So this is like very disparate conditions, and they all get improved benefits with mindfulness. We know that when we have people that are experiencing stress, this can level cortisol levels, which helps work with the stress response. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth in a second. And then thereby increases relaxation, but also with certain practices could improve self-compassion and relationships. When we add mindfulness, please don't hear it as a replacement, hear it as an add. When we add mindfulness to other therapeutic interventions, we find that depressed patients improve more than without. The same thing is true with addiction treatments. We see when we add mindfulness to other treatments, there is less relapse. And then along with the self-compassion, there are actually brain studies that show that the regions of the brain that control compassion, empathy, and executive control change with practice. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second as well. These are my favorite studies because it's just so crazy to me to think about, but they actually have done randomized controlled trials with patients who have psoriasis. When they add the mindfulness, the psoriasis clears more. And then with the flu studies, they did a randomized controlled trial with two groups. One of them got an active control. I don't remember what they were doing. Let's just say a knitting club, something where they're getting together and they're working together. The other group got a mindfulness training. They all got the flu shot, and then they measured their levels of immune response from blood. And the meditation group had a better immune response than whatever the active control group was. So they're actually doing biological markers for a whole variety of diseases now, and finding that when you add mindfulness to whatever else you're doing, the response of the body is better. And this even includes cardiovascular protective factors. We know that it lowers blood pressure, but through epigenetics, which is the gene expression, right? That can regulate protein production, that certain proteins that are monitored in the bloodstream can either be increased or decreased through practice, and some of them are just known to improve cardiovascular health. So this is just a little snippet, a little example of an overview of the kinds of research that's being done right now on mindfulness and the body. And so we often think of the practice as a mental state, which it is, but this clearly is having an impact on our physiology. One of the explanations that, because people always ask me, well, why or how, right? How is this happening in the body? One of the explanations is that the calming effect that it has may be decreasing inflammation, right? And then we also talked about the cortisol level. So it's shifting hormonal responses, but it may also be decreasing inflammation in the body. That is a guess, right? That is a guess. I don't think anyone really knows for sure. So we're going to switch gears now and talk about the brain. So this is actually how we teach brain science to kids, which is probably more my level. I am not a brain scientist, so we're going to bring it down a little bit. So this is called the hand model of the brain, and Dan Siegel, who's up there at the top, created it. So if you put your thumb under and create a fist, this is like your brain. So this is the front of the brain, the back, and this would be your spine coming down. Does that make sense to everyone? I hope so. So that's the hand model of the brain. We're going to dive into it just a little bit more. So this is your limbic system in here, which includes your amygdala and hippocampus. And that's the part of the brain, if you look at that second hand with the blue thumb, that's the part of the brain that controls your emotional response. Sometimes it's called the lizard brain. So when you hit fight, flight, freeze, that's what gets activated, okay? The brainstem is our automatic functions that leads down into the spinal cord. And those are things like your respiration and your heartbeat. So that's your automatic functions. This top part, which is your prefrontal cortex, which in your head looks like that, is the part that does all of your complex decision making. It lets you think more clearly when you're self-regulated. It's your kind of master control panel right here, right? So what happens when you hit fight, flight, freeze, or you get overwhelmed, really, really stressed, is the amygdala and hippocampus in this limbic system freak out, take over, and the prefrontal cortex, which normally is the thing controlling your emotions, Dan Siegel calls it flipping your lid, because it's actually no longer communicating with the emotional center of the brain, right? And so a mindfulness practice, what they're doing is helping us put that lid back on. Not literally. I once had a little kid ask me, is that really what happens in your head? Not literally, but chemically and electrically. That's what's happening in your head, right? The communication piece. So when we are able to re-engage that lid, that's called engaging our soothing system, right? And this changes our state, right? So our state of mind. So if you think about it again, the threat happens, and the threat can be real, the threat can be imagined. The threat in the past for humans, the way we evolved, like it was a saber-toothed tiger, right? But now the threat could be fear of illness, right? The stress of having an illness. The threat could be an email from someone you just don't want to hear from, or that client or your boss or something like that. The threat could be anything like that. And it also could be a trauma trigger, so that maybe in the moment there's no real threat, but the threat from the past gets triggered. I hope that makes sense to you all. So whatever the threat is, we lose our lid, and what practices can do is re-engage the lid. So looking at the picture of this brain scan, this is an fMRI study of long-term meditation master. So someone who's been meditating 20, 30 years deeply. They're put in an fMRI and they're asked to do a thinking task, and that's the brain on the left. So the brain on the left with all the pretty colors is showing all the activity in the brain. So that's what our brain looks like when we're thinking. Then the person was asked to meditate. And then after that meditative state, they did the fMRI again, and that's the brain on the right. So please don't take this that if you start meditating today, that in another week, that will be your brain. This is someone that's been doing it a really long time. But the idea is that meditation and mindfulness changes the state of mind. And then from there, what ends up happening over time is that it ends up changing our brain structures. Now, this is not magic. Everything you do repeatedly changes your brain. So if you decide tomorrow that you want to go learn how to juggle, and you do it every day for weeks and weeks and weeks, and you get pretty good at juggling, the spatial control centers of your brain would be changed, right? And your muscle, they call it muscle memory, right? But the pathways of the brain that help you do that juggling activity, those are going to get changed. And I like to use the analogy of like, if you had a grassy field and you walked across it once, you wouldn't leave a path. But if you had the same grassy field and you did 10 times every day, after some weeks, you would wear a groove in that path. And that's basically what's happening in our brains, right? So I always want to say to people, if we know that this is what's going to happen, how can we choose activities that are going to promote our health and well-being and build those into our lives so that we can kind of maximize what we know is happening? And so what does it actually do in the brain? So here are just a few areas. Again, I'm not a brain scientist. This is all just pulled from research, right? This is not me. But things that improve are things like meta-awareness, and you see in parentheses the part of the brain that is responsible for that they have seen shift in different meditation studies. Exteroceptive and interoceptive awareness. So basically that means I'm aware of my body in space. I'm aware of what's happening in my body. Like I notice when I'm hungry and thirsty, all of those things. That's what that is right there. Memory consolidation and reconsolidation. This is important if people have trauma, because we now know that traumatic memories don't get stored the same way as our regular memories. Emotional regulation. Intra and interhemispheric communication. So that's just like the parts of the brain talking to each other through the corpus callosum. And then attention. So if you go back to the practice that we did at the very beginning, we're working with attention. So of course we see attention improve. That's even true for kiddos with things like ADD and ADHD. And so please don't hear that as a cure. It's an improvement. It's not that it goes away, right? And then the last thing there is somesthesis, and that's pain regulation. Great. So I'm just gonna grab my dog. Hey, that's it. Here, take him. Sorry about that. So I thought it would, maybe I'll pause here and just see if anyone has any questions about kind of what is mindfulness, how does it play a role in a public health approach, or why it would be important, or anything, and then we can shift into trying what that looks like in an actual practice. So any questions, comments, skepticism, all is welcome.
Well, I mean, that brings up a question for me. Do you get a lot of skepticism in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think even though the body of research is really growing, people feel still like mindfulness is a little alternative or woo-woo, or, you know, like it's not fully mainstream, even though more and more it's becoming that, and the body of research is really growing and growing. So we do get some not sure kind of people, right? People that just don't have full buy-in. And I think that the other thing that I think we find is it's a very individual or personal practice for people. And so they don't always kind of get the societal level implications for doing it widespread, which of course is what I want to advocate for, is that we can actually do this in a large scale, and we can be providing support to people on a large scale, which is really different than, oh, I just, have my app and I'm doing my practice or something like that. Okay. All right.
I just have
So,
another one.
yeah, sure, please.
I wanted to give space in case anyone else chimed in, but
Sure.
that fMRI was really interesting, and I understand
Yeah.
you saying that's someone that's been practicing for decades. Have they done studies, or are there released images of somebody who's newer to it? Do we have any idea how long it takes for your brain to be able to do that?
Yeah. So the brain studies that I've read, as little as 8 to 9 weeks of regular practice starts to show shifts. And one of the really cool studies that was done using MRI brain imaging was on veterans. So they did, so basically that thumb part, the limbic system, the amygdala and hippocampus, that's the part of the brain when you have trauma that actually shows changes. And I'm not going to get it right, but one of them gets larger and one of them gets smaller. I can't remember which does which. But basically, after 9 weeks of practicing, it starts to reverse. So the one that got bigger from stress starts to shrink again. The one that got smaller starts to grow. And so, like I said, that happens with, basically 2 months of practice. They start to see that change when they do pre-post measurements on veterans that have come back from wars. And that's like very severe PTSD levels for some of these folks coming back, right? So then when they continue practicing, the effect is maintained or continues. But what they have also found is that if they stop practicing, like shortly after, it can reverse, especially if it's someone in ongoing trauma, right? And so, yeah, I think that was the one study that's coming to mind that I really remember stood out to me, because we don't really see an effect before that 8 week point. Somehow it takes at least, which makes sense, like regularly doing it for at least 2 months. But yeah, right around there, and that, from my perspective, from the research that Awaken does on its own programming, that's right around the time where we'll see statistically significant shifts in people reporting stress. So people are really feeling a difference in their experience after around 8 weeks as well. And so that's the exciting part, is like we have data that shows, well, the brain is actually shifting around that time. And then you have people actually reporting, I feel calmer, I have less stress, I do feel more well-being in my life, and I'm feeling healthier and happier in my life based on 8 weeks of practice. And the brain studies back that up, is that's when the shifts start to occur.
Thank you.
Sure. No, I mean, I could talk about it all day, of course. This is fascinating to me. Okay, well, cool. So I thought we would try this practice because it's a little acronym that can be easy for people to remember and take with them. And I think it encapsulates exactly everything that mindfulness can do in a practice. And so I'm gonna guide you through it, but I'm gonna read first what you're gonna do. So the first thing is just feeling in yourself your response to this talk. Just notice what's happening in your body and in your mind. So I just gave you some information, and you might have dialogue in your head, like of disbelief or of agreement or of excitement, whatever that is. It's okay. It can be anything. So you're just going to recognize what's happening. And then I'll guide you through just allowing it to be there, and see how it says grounds of love. So just, open acceptance with care. And then we'll deepen a little bit with investigating with kindness, to just kind of ask a few questions around what's actually there. And then the N has two meanings, not identification. So whatever is happening is not who you are. It's just thinking or feeling. And then asking yourself what is needed, and if you need to nurture anything in your experience right now. Okay. So I would invite you to just notice your posture, and if you want to kind of feel into what it might be like to embody your dignity and worth by however you're sitting right now. So just taking a moment to feel into that. And then we'll move into recognize. So just asking yourself what's happening in your body or your mind right now, what's present for you at this moment. So just an inquiry. And then allowing, asking yourself, can I be with what's happening? Can I welcome whatever I'm finding? And then shifting briefly into investigating when you're ready and asking, how am I reacting to what's happening in my present experience? What's my mood? Where am I feeling this in the body? Am I making any assumptions, or is there any thinking that I'm noticing about what's happening? And then moving into non-identification and just recognizing that whatever my thinking is, whatever my feelings are, they are all passing states. So we don't have to identify them as ourself, right? Even our thoughts and beliefs, they arise and they change over time. So we can just notice that any thinking or feeling that's happening right now is just for the moment. It's not our identity. Then the last part to nurture is asking the question, what's needed right now? What can I offer myself in this moment, or possibly after this call? And then just taking one last moment to feeling into this practice. And as you're ready, releasing that and possibly returning to the feelings in the body, of the body in the chair, whatever your anchor was prior to the practice, our first practice, or the feeling of the body breathing, whatever helps ground you back into the moment. And in just another moment, I'll ring the chime to bring us back. Great. I hope that was a good reflective practice for you. So I just had a slide with some final thoughts for me, and then maybe if there's any more questions or anything for you all. So again, my personal opinion is that we are going to continue to experience environmental degradation and climate change and emergency, and this will be causing more illness. It will also impact, stress, or traumatize many people, possibly all of us, and that building resilience and practices that we can use to deal with the stressors and the traumas and the illnesses is needed at the population level. I also think that our medical models currently, both for physical and mental health, don't reach that level. So that's not going to work. And I also believe that it's going to be community-based programming and working together to build collective resilience and healing. That's going to be key, right? Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for letting me share my thoughts on the topic. I'd be happy to take any questions or hear folks' reflections or opinions about any of it. Yeah, Molly, you can just go for it. Unmute yourself.
Wonderful. And I loved how much I'm a scientist by training, so I love how much science you brought into this. It's super fascinating. My question though is one just about, there's so many, all of us would benefit from this. And obviously certain populations, as you were mentioning, veterans and, at-risk populations in general. And in our case, it's, populations at risk from being insulted and assaulted by these environmental exposures and toxicants in our world. And I'm just wondering, about uptake and entry into very raw spaces. How do you navigate that? How do you, go into a community that is just rough and raw and try to talk this through with them? Cause I'm just curious to hear your experiences with it. What's worked, what hasn't, what have been challenges? What have you seen as real opportunities for, uptake and absorbing and connecting with the information? It's they're not new concepts anymore, but it still is on the fringe, as it were,
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering how that works in your own programming and practice.
Yeah, great question. So for us, communities or groups approach us and invite us in. And so usually there's an internal champion of what we do. And what I love to do then is to work with that champion and co-facilitate with them. So someone who's already one, we've been invited in, we haven't just dropped in ourselves, right? And that makes a very big difference. And then inviting someone who is trusted in that community to co-facilitate with us, co-sponsor what we're doing, promote what we're doing, so that we're not the ones doing that promotion, but the person who's already grounded and established and has relationship in that community is the one inviting us in and working alongside us to do this kind of work. I think that is how we go about it, because I don't want to come in and tell anyone what they need or should be doing. It has to be more organic than that. And then on the flip side of that, what I do is a ton of presentations like this and tabling and community events to get the word out that we're doing this work and this is what we're trying to promote, so that we can be invited in. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that made sense to what you were asking.
It absolutely does. And keep doing what you're doing. It's very important. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you. I think someone else, I think Michael had a hand up as well.
No, sorry, not a hand up. Just applause.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, other question?
I have a question for you, Stephanie.
Sure.
In my experience, both personal and professional, I find a lot of resistance to mindfulness broadly. And I think a lot of that is just can be attributed to just it being like uncharted, unfamiliar territory for people. So given that, what would your like recommendation be for someone like who knows nothing about this space, who is somewhat interested, and how would you recommend they get started in mindfulness? What resources should they seek, etc.?
Um, yeah, so they should take our class. Of course. No, I'm just kidding. But we do offer an intro course, and I like, so, I was being real at the beginning when I said there's like so many ways to practice mindfulness. And I think what happens in the like public relations piece of the PR around mindfulness is that it only gets described as meditation, and that's not true, right? That's just not real. Like there are tons of ways to develop a mindfulness practice. And that could look like yoga. That could look like Tai Chi. That could look like Qigong. That could look like running, but in a mindful way. So there's actually a book, I think it's called Running with the Mind of Meditation. Like, so the quality of building that non-judgmental present moment awareness, right? That's the skill we want to build. That's the mindfulness practice. What we do with it can be 100 different things, right? Some people do mantra practice, and mantra is not, it doesn't have to be something in Sanskrit or Hindi or Tibetan, right? Like there was research study years ago, it was a book called The Relaxation Response. And so this guy actually studied mantra practice, and he was a doctor at a university, and he did control groups where people practice this. And the mantra he gave people was literally the number 1, 0-NE, that word. They would just repeat that. That was their quote unquote mantra. And he showed like repeatedly that it lowered people's blood pressure. So I think part of the resistance that I experience is people think it's an Eastern religious practice, which, let's be real, it is. And there's a way to do it that's secular and not an Eastern religious practice, right? So I hope I'm answering your question, but I think that people need to find the thing that's going to work for them within like the large scope of mindfulness practices. And then back to my pitch about our classes, what we try to do for folks in our class is kind of a smorgasbord of different experiences around practice and how it supports emotional regulation, so that people can find 2 or 3 things, or even just one thing that really works for them, and keep that up. I hope that was helpful.
No, that was super helpful. I think it just like emphasizes the point where it is really important to like enter into spaces and not lead with fear, but lead with intrigue. And that's kind of what I took away from your response.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you're right on the money. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah, you're welcome.
See, do we have any additional questions today?
I have another question.
Sure.
Has Awaken Pittsburgh, I'm not quite sure how to frame this. Um, are you working with the specific like cancer community at all? People already impacted by cancer in any type of studies, or just cancer support centers?
Yeah, not right now, although I mean, I would love to be working with a population like that, because I really think that, well, 2 things. Practicing in a group is so supportive of developing a practice. And when you practice in a group with shared experience, it really, really builds something beautiful. And I know, and I've shared this with you, Danny, my mom is a cancer survivor, and I worked with her on practices to support her when she was going through her cancer journey. and she found it to be very supportive. So I just know from our family experience with that these practices really can be an emotional support for the survivor and the family. And yeah, to have a group to practice together with, like it's such a wonderful thing. So anyone on the call or listening to the recording, if you'd like to get something like that started, we would love to help you do that. Yeah, that would be really, really wonderful. But no, we're not currently doing that. And I do know that I mentioned the pain management part, that some of the work that we do in our class is around holding difficulty. And this is another piece of brain research that I found that I really thought was fascinating. Emotional pain and physical pain actually light up the same spot in the brain, right? And so that pain management piece is both the emotionally difficult and the physically difficult. So, part of the survivor of illness experience is dealing with physical pain, right? And emotional pain, especially when confronting something that's potentially life-threatening, right? So I think there's something to offer there.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just gonna flash on my last screen. I know you put our website in your chat, but there's also my email address. So anyone watching or listening that wants to get in touch with me, happy to hop on a call with anyone that wants to talk further about any of the ideas or working with us or anything at all.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. This was such an enlightening and just really interesting conversation today. I really appreciate it and just extend so much gratitude for you inviting us into this space today. So thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
And yeah, and again, before we end today, just wanted to remind everyone that I will be following up with the recording here shortly, so that should be sent out later on this afternoon.
Molly, did you have one other thing you wanted to share? I saw you unmute. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Great, thanks. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Enjoy.